I've heard it said that life is one long series of consecutive problems, punctuated only by the occasional crisis. If that's true, then it explains why so many of us today are suffering with worry, anxiety, depression, and overthinking. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about a book that made a profound difference on my ability to cope with stress and worry, and hopefully it'll do the same for you. So if you're ready, let's look at Dale Carnegie's How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. Hey, welcome back. Dale Carnegie was one of the first self-help authors in the United States, and his best-selling book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, was a bestseller and sold over 30 million copies. But what most people may not know is that he also wrote a book in 1948, which also sold tens of millions of copies and helped just as many people. And it was called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, wherein he gives advice and 8 strategies on how to cope with stress, how to manage worry, and how to deal with life's problems in a more effective and more empowering manner. Given that it's one of my main missions to help separated and divorced dads cope with and emerge from the private hell of going through all of their traumas, I get so many emails and letters from men who are going through extreme crises and they don't know how to manage, they're overthinking all the time, and they need a hand. One of the really interesting features that he talked about was how the Mayo Clinic claimed that 4 out of 5 hospitalizations in the United States during that time was due to stress-related disorders, given the effects of long-term chronic stress on cardiovascular problems, immune problems, digestive disorders, reproductive disorders, and so on. So that much of what ails modern people can be traced back down to psychosocial factors. If that's the case, then we need to train ourselves to more effectively deal with those sorts of challenges so that we don't find our whole physiology suffering as a result. Strategy number 1. This strategy is claimed by Dale Carnegie as being able to solve 90% of the stress-related worry that you have, and results in basically dealing with the problem of overthinking and taking action. The idea is that most stress and overthinking causes a paralysis, and the best way to manage any kind of stress is to take massive action. And so the idea here is, if you're going to overthink, then be systematic about it. Write down everything you can, analyze it in a more rational way, and then take action and stick to it. So first of all, he says, get your facts straight. Write down on a piece of paper exactly what's worrying you. And then for each of those, write down what possible thing can go wrong. And then for each worry that you list, write down what possible thing you can do about it. Once you've listed those things, then pick the option that seems to be most empowering, or at the very least, disempowers you less than all the other ones. And then thirdly, you need to take action, irreversibly, fully committed, without vacillating or backtracking, and commit yourself 100% to that course of action and see it through to the end. He gives an example of Galen Litchfield, who was an American businessman in China during World War II. And what had happened is, in order to preserve the assets of the company he was working for, he moved some of them offshore so that the Japanese wouldn't be able to get their hands on it. Anyway, he heard through the grapevine that the Japanese commander had found out, and so now he was terrified of what the consequences were going to be. Typically, if you were found to be doing something of that nature, you were sent to a horrible concentration camp scenario, tortured and put to death. So he was frozen in terror as to how he was going to cope with this situation. So what Galen did was he took out his typewriter and he wrote down exactly what possibly he could do. Firstly, he could make excuses. Secondly, he could make a run for it. And thirdly, he could just play dumb and pretend that there was nothing wrong. So what he did was he chose the third one because it seemed to be the one that left him with the most options at the deep end. Anyway, to cut a long story short, when he went into the meeting with this Japanese admiral, the admiral was so preoccupied with so many other matters that he had cooled off somewhat from his initial anger and left it at that. Didn't pursue the matter and certainly didn't execute our friend. So in the end, his rationalizing and his choosing a path of action that gave him the most options won in the end. Dale Carnegie tells us that in a similar way, if we write down everything that's worrying us and then write down all the possible options that we have, analyze those options for which is the most empowering among them, and then take action and stick to it no matter what the outcome, at least we'll be on our way and we won't be stressing more than we absolutely have to. The next strategy in dealing with stress and worry was what he called reconciling yourself with the inevitable. And what Carnegie meant by this was think about the worst possible outcome of any situation and then accept that that outcome is likely to happen. Now, we all know, of course, that less than 10% of the things we worry about ever come to pass. So the odds of the worst case scenario occurring are very, very small. But nevertheless, they cause us the bulk of our worries. So the idea here is to look at the worst possible thing that can happen. You know, in any situation, your marriage breaks up, you go to jail, or you die from some chronic illness, and reconcile yourself with that as if it was incontrovertible. And then what you do is, secondly, you go about dealing with that. You've got to take some action once again, just as in the first example, to deal with the consequences of that situation. So in this case, he gives an example of a man who was diagnosed by his doctors as having severe duodenal ulcers. And what they told him was that he was going to die a very slow and painful death. He won't be able to digest food properly, and that he's only got 6 months at best of misery before he expires. So this man's idea was, okay, if I'm going to die, I may as well have a good time doing it. So what he did was he bought himself a casket and decided to go around the world, took his casket with him wherever he went to lots of exotic places, met lots of interesting people, made some new friends, ate lots of interesting and exotic food, and surprise, surprise, given his elimination of stress, he recovered fully, came back to America, sold his casket, and lived a very long and fruitful life. It's been well established that if you can get on top of your stress, a lot of your health problems will evaporate. And so I think that's at the heart of this second admonition, is to accept that the worst possible thing might happen, put into plan what you're going to do about it, and then as you manage those problems, the action you take will help to relieve a lot of that anxiety. Whether or not that thing comes to pass or not, the odds are that you'll be able to bounce back, you'll be able to recover, life will go on, and you'll look back upon it with a sense of awe that you managed to sail and navigate through this problem with as much grace and dignity as possible. The third strategy was to live for today. And what Carnegie meant by that was to compartmentalize everything you do in chunks, so that each day you focus on the tasks at hand for that day and not worry about what went yesterday and not focus excessively on what may come tomorrow. That's not to say you don't plan for tomorrow and set goals for tomorrow, but you avoid thinking about all of the consequences of tomorrow. So the idea he proposed was like the watertight compartments on a ship, that if one of them leaked, it could be sealed off and the ship could continue on its way. So focusing on today, putting in 100% for today without worrying about tomorrow and without wringing your hands over what happened yesterday is Dale's admonition as another method to control the tendency for overthinking. The example that Dale gives in this account is a woman who had lost her husband and had spent quite some time in grief, loneliness and sadness at his passing, and just couldn't see herself moving beyond that until she read an article that said that to the wise man, every morning is like a new life. And taking that to heart, she began to look at every day as a new opportunity. And eventually she overcame her grief and lived a long and, to all accounts, successful life. So perhaps focusing only on the tasks at hand is a way of minimizing the distractions of the worry and overthinking that you might be in right now. The fourth strategy is described as a bit of a stockbroking term. In other words, taking a stop-loss order, which in lay speak means only allowing a set amount of time to consider a problem before letting it go. So the idea here is that, again, focusing on problems excessively distracts you from the ability to move on and take on new challenges. It's investing energy needlessly into activities that are not fruitful. So you put in as much as you feel will be worthy, and then you let go and focus on something else. So the examples that are given in this story are Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian writer, who is well known to have had a horrible marriage where he and his wife were at each other's throats for nigh on 50 years. The idea was that it would have been better for both of them if they had just gone their separate ways, if reconciliation was impossible, rather than torture each other for 50 years without end. Another example he gave was Abraham Lincoln, who is well known to have said that for anyone that had spoken ill of him, he would forgive them immediately if they would stop. He wouldn't hold grudges. And so it's a way for someone to redirect their attention to the things that really matter, rather than be consumed by thinking about things that won't do you any good. So the fifth strategy is what Dale Carnegie refers to as focusing on the positive stuff. In other words, the fake it till you make it paradigm. Life doesn't always give you what you want, and it doesn't always smell like roses. But if you focus only on those negatives, you will have a twisted or warped view of what you actually are experiencing. Because we're neurologically geared to focus on danger and harm avoidance, it's very easy for us to ignore all the things we've got going for us and emphasize only those that are causing us peril or grief. So Dale Carnegie's admonition in this example is to improve your posture, to walk like you're successful, to act happy even if you're not, to put happy thoughts in your mind, redirect your attention to things that you should do rather than the things that are consuming you. And you'll find that pretty soon you'll drag your subconscious, kicking and screaming perhaps, into a better way of thinking. The example that he gives in this case is a woman whose husband was in the military and they were consigned to go and live in the Mojave Desert. She certainly didn't want to go and live in that kind of an environment, and so she was very unhappy. Having spoken and complained to her father, he advised her to simply make the most of it and try to find a way to enjoy herself. So slowly but surely she started focusing on the things that were pleasant and nice in the area, the sunsets, the Joshua trees, and making friends with some of the locals, especially the natives. She soon found that she developed a real interest in the area and in the culture of the people that she met, and so her life became not just tolerable, but actually quite enjoyable. So it's about looking into your situation a little bit more beyond what you see and what you could make of it. The sixth strategy to dealing with worry and anxiety is one that every single parent is well acquainted with, and that one is lack of gratitude. Now, the problem here is, as parents, of course, we put a lot of love and care into giving our kids the best resources and opportunities that we possibly can, those that we perhaps never had. And so when we receive no gratitude, we become offended, frustrated, and disappointed in not receiving it. Now, I'm not just talking about kids. It could be co-workers, it could be bosses, it could be any environment that you find yourself contributing to the welfare of others, but not being acknowledged for it. Now, that obviously can be a great source of grief, as any parent or any worker can attest to. But Dale Carnegie admonishes us in this example to do it for the joy of doing it, not to expect gratitude. Now, as harsh as that might seem, the reality is that most people are pretty selfish and function only for their own self-gratification. If we live our lives looking for an exchange in the way that we give, we're going to be sorely disappointed, and that's going to prevent us from living with the kind of joy and vitality that we really want for ourselves. So the idea here is to just accept people for the way they are and carry on being gracious and kind for the sake of it. The example that is given in this case is the lawyer Samuel Leibowitz, who it's been counted had saved over 78 people from the electric chair in his career as a lawyer. How many people thanked him for it? Not one. 78 lives saved, not once did he get a thank you. I think that's pretty reasonable cause to be cranky, but he was just glad that he saved 78 lives. It's part of his job, but it makes you feel good anyway. So focus on the fact that you've saved lives rather than how many people have said thank you. Strategy number 7. This is a really interesting one because it's not one that we think about very much. And that's the fact that when people criticize you, they're actually giving you a compliment. The idea here is that criticism is a form of envy. It means that you're achieving things and you're taking action that they either can't or won't. And so it's far easier to drag you back down to their level than it is for them to rise up and take similar action. So we tend to think of people that criticize us as being against us, and that's certainly possible. But sometimes those that criticize us are those that love us, and they don't want us to get hurt, they don't want us to fail, and so they try to coddle us and stop us from taking risks and pushing beyond our comfort zone. So it's really important to look at criticism in a much more rational light. Sometimes it comes from a place of love, sometimes it comes from a place of envy. In either case, if you've been criticized, it usually means you're pushing yourself beyond where you've been, and that's always a good thing. Trying to be better, bigger, smarter, wiser, healthier, wealthier is something that most people don't want to do. They're content to sit in mediocrity, neither pushing themselves to extremes, but neither achieving the kinds of amazing life experiences that are waiting for us. So the idea here is not just accepting criticism, but welcoming criticism. Now, sometimes, of course, criticism is constructive, and it's helpful to be redirected in a more fruitful path. But if the criticism seems to be without any kind of productive outcome, then you should take it as a motivation to keep going. It indicates you're probably on the right track. The final strategy that Dale Carnegie promotes in his book is to learn to relax and to rest before you actually get tired. And the idea here is, when we've done studies of companies and productivity that try to limit the amount of free time people have and try to push them to be as productive as possible, we found that burnout is a very common outcome. So time and again it's been demonstrated that if you give people a little bit more downtime, but you ensure that they're using that time for rest rather than distraction, their energy levels improve so that they can then continue to be much more productive. And this is one of the reasons why siestas in Europe have always been very popular. Companies have also given people extra half hours for lunch on the proviso that they've rested or at least had 40 winks rather than rush around and doing work. And it's increased their productivity in some cases by 30%. So use that as an example for yourself. Don't wait until things start falling out of your hands before you stop and take a break. Don't wait until you can no longer see before you take some downtime from the screen. Give yourself a little bit of a rest while you still feel reasonably good so that you can recharge your batteries more effectively and be more productive. Well, there you have it. A brief introduction to Dale Carnegie's words of wisdom in How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. I found it extremely helpful, and hopefully you will make a study of it, purchase the book, and implement some of those strategies to make your own lives a little bit better. Stress certainly is one of the great killers in the modern world, and I tend to find that in my clinical practice, patients suffer from stress more than any other health condition. So please do let me know what your thoughts are on the book. Leave your comments in the section below. If you like my videos, please do subscribe. It really makes a big difference to see more and more people appreciating the hard work I do. It's all self-funded. I do this really to help people because I was in a pretty bad place and wanted to help others improve their own quality of life. So I'm not peddling anything. So give me a couple of thumbs up, leave some comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, walk tall. Cheers.